Looks like we made it. Thank you, PJ. We're back. You know, we were just in the private chat, a little behind the scenes look here at 8 Bits. We get pumped on that song every time we hear it. Our podcast listeners get to hear that song, right, Brandon?
Oh, of course. We do not edit that out for the podcast.
Good, because
everybody should subscribe to.
Song. It gives me life every week. Yes. Where can people subscribe to our podcast, Brandon?
We can find us at 8bits.tv. It's probably the coolest URL I've ever gotten the opportunity to purchase because it's a .tv.
That's great.
But yeah, if you go to 8bits.tv, you can subscribe to the podcast. You can see all the previous episodes, or if you prefer to watch us on YouTube via video, then you can check out all the live streams too. Everything we do is there. And
yeah, all the previous eps with all the awesome guests that we've had. We've done, I think, almost 50 episodes at this point. We're getting there. What is this?
Yeah.
49? Oh my goodness.
We've been going for over a year now. We've been doing it once a week with the exception of when we aren't allowed to stream because Microsoft is having a conference or maybe there's a holiday. Like, I don't think we did it over New Year's. But yeah, we're rounding the corner on to year number 2. We've
been at it for a year now. And just like Brandon said, if you want to watch any of the previous episode, and we've had some very cool guests, some guests that are in the chat right now. Also, if you're listening to the podcast, we do this as a live stream, live, every Wednesday at 1 Pacific time. So definitely come if you ever want to ask questions live to our guests and just get involved with the show, come and join us. We have a good time. Right, PJ? Yeah. PJ's in the chat.
And maybe you can be a guest on the show one day, too.
Yes. Full circle. Brandon, how have you been? How has your week been?
Oh, so far, so good. I do want to apologize in advance. We have a gentleman here that's removing a tree. So if you hear chainsaws in the background or loud banging, just know that I'm safe. Everything's fine.
You know what? Judgment-free zone. We are all still technically working from home, even here in California. And I feel like who amongst us has not had a significant other or a friend make an espresso in the background of a live stream? So sound effects are welcome here.
That's right. Tony in the comments says, removing the tree, the internet. Yeah, hopefully he doesn't cut the internet cable and not go dark. But yeah, we had a tree that its roots were encroaching in on the foundation. And so it was, I hate cutting down trees, and we actually have landscaping plans. We're going to add more stuff to the backyard soon. But yeah, we just bought this house and I can't afford to redo a foundation. So it was either that or the tree, and poor tree lost out. But hopefully it won't be too loud.
Well, I am very, very excited. Here in California, things have started opening up. So it's very interesting to go out into the world and be able to go to restaurants again and not have to wear a mask all the time. So I will say it's very different. I think we all thought this would be a lot shorter than it would be. And it feels, you know what, I kind of miss making faces at people under my mask. I feel like I kind of need to pull my expressions back in now. But it's been a lovely week to be outside. And yeah, I'm super excited because I'm hosting the Static Web Apps Conference next week. You can go to aka.ms/SWAconf. It's going to be super fun. There's going to be a keynote by John Papa, so that will be very exciting. But I kind of love this conference format, Brandon, because here's the thing. As we all know, I have ADHD. My attention span is very short, especially during a global pandemic, right? We're all home, we're in meetings all day, and it's really hard to pay attention. And this cool trend that actually I'm sure our guest will have a lot to say about this because they just ran a fabulous event similar to this as well, is the talks, instead of being the usual, 30-minute or, 45-minute with question format, are 15 minutes. So that's like super digestible for my brain. And I'm really, really excited because there's going to be all these announcements happening, talking about the Azure Static Web App CLI, how to do just like static web apps in the production API, all kinds of stuff. And I am going to be your hostess with the mostess. I'm going to be hosting it, asking them all the questions, all your burning questions about static web apps. So I'm really excited. And I'm also excited to learn more about static web apps. Like, I get to watch the whole conference because I'm hosting it. So maybe I'm
Yeah,
going to
I mean,
be making a static web app for like my Furby. Who knows?
what even is a static web app?
Ooh, great question, Brandon. Well, it's basically a way, Azure Static Web Apps are basically the quickest way for your JavaScript to have static sites from code to scale. So the way that I like to explain it is, you know how like in GitHub, you get a GitHub page with like your GitHub repo automatically? Very much just a static website, just very simple with JavaScript. You can get up and running very, very quickly, and just super excited to hear all the announcements. I use static web apps all the time to just web up something really quickly. You know, like I think we always say we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to want to build a website completely from scratch. So I use them all the time to host. I think I have my Azure Mario Kart Astrology on an Azure Static Web App. That sounds right.
Yeah.
Just a great place to have all my data on all of my different Mario Kart characters and their stats. Just, yeah. Someone said in the chat, my new wheel is the best wheel.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
no,
think as engineers, we tend to think that way, but there's a lot of really great tools to just help that be a lot more easier.
yeah, and static web apps are great for anything where the data isn't dynamic. It's not necessarily interactive. So think of like a blogging platform, right? Where we're just
Yes.
posting articles. Those are great use cases for static web apps. And I would argue most websites could be static web apps. And if you can, you might want to do it because it's way cheaper. So
Yes.
with Azure Static Web Apps, they essentially what Azure does, it just saves your code and then on demand will display that to the user. So it's not like you have to pay all these server costs in the background. You just have this great looking website that you designed that you don't have to pay a fortune for. So check it out, aka.ms/SWAConf. So
I was just thinking
SWACONF.
a fun project, a static web apps project, I'm going to write this down, is replicating a GeoCities type page because we talk a lot on this show about tech nostalgia and how much we loved our Angel Fire GeoCities. Maybe I'll like recreate that for an Azure static web app. Stay tuned.
Love it.
You heard it here first. Any updates in the Xamarin world? I went to Maui recently. How is Maui doing, Brandon?
Ooh, .NET MAUI's coming. We just pushed out preview 5 of .NET 6 and also .NET MAUI. There's still we're still working on it. So obviously it's still in previews. There's still certain things that aren't in the library yet. So things like if you ever needed the Xamarin Forms content view, we're still adding that to Maui. So it's still very much a work in progress, but you can check out the previews. So I wouldn't try using it yet for your App Store apps, but if you want to play around with it a little bit, get a feel for the syntax, that way you're the .NET MAUI expert once it finally launches. Go for it. But yeah, probably. I mean, Preview 6 is going to have a bunch more features in it, and yeah, for the next couple months, it's just going to get more and more feature complete, and then we'll obviously in November it'll move totally into GA, into production. So it's very exciting, and it's all open source, and you can follow along. So please do, but also stay tuned for all the updates over the next couple weeks.
So exciting. I keep seeing you and friend of the pod, Sweeky, talking about all of the awesome updates coming around the mountain. Very excited. Cool. Should we bring in our guest? Anything else? Anything else we want to update our listeners and our viewers about?
That sounds good to me. I mean, let's bring her in.
So excited. Okay, so I met this lovely human being, I believe through the conference and bootcamp world. We have another bootcamp grad with us here today. And I believe I totally just fell in love with this creative person who had a lot of handwritten or hand-drawn visuals in their presentation. And I was like, an artist. I love it. So I'm very, very excited to welcome this person to the show. They are a beam of positivity in the tech community. Welcome, Katy. Hello.
Hi. That might be the nicest intro I've ever had, and I liked it.
It's so true. I just remember, I came from a creative arts world myself and seen a lot of tech talks and having, the standard, clip art or the images that you get from a stock photo, if you will. But I loved all these hand-drawn examples to illustrate a point. Do you remember what that talk was? I feel like it's a DevOps talk, maybe?
I think the first one that I maybe did was just like, what is time series data?
Yes.
Because here's the thing. Every time somebody asks me a question I don't know the answer to, I'm like, great, I'll go find out. And then I'll write a talk about it.
Which is the best way to write a talk, I think.
I do that all the time. I call it conference-driven development, where
I
there's
love
a topic.
That.
Yeah, so if there's a topic I'm excited about, like I did this years ago with GraphQL. I was actually at a conference. I sat in a talk on GraphQL. I was like, I need to learn more about this. So I just started submitting talks for it. And I was like, well, we'll see. If one of these gets picked up, then I have to learn it. And it works surprisingly well. You'll definitely learn it. You might be stressed out and you might be hating yourself because you're like, why did I submit this talk and I don't know anything about it?
And you're probably nervous because you're fresh to the content but exhilarating, I'm sure.
I am so good at reading manuals. It's like, that's what I basically have a degree in. So it's just reading.
You know what? I feel like I better understood time series development because of your talk. Like I'm a very visual learner, and it helped me learn. So thank you, Katy.
And you know what? For you, Chloe, anytime.
Thank you so much. Katy, tell the lovely people tuning in and listening to the show about yourself and what you do.
Oh, well, hello. I'm Katy. I am a community manager at Circle CI right now. So that's one thing that I do. I have been a developer advocate. I have been an editor of PhD theses, erotica novels. I worked in retail and I made juice for a job one year. I had never drank a juice, but I was like, I get it. You put fruit in the juicer. I am a sort of a person of all trades who has been in a lot of jobs and a couple careers. I went to college for music, switched courses to literature, worked in that for a while, switched courses again. And so I am very much a Renaissance woman, one could say, or you could also say that I just have ADHD. Both things would be true. So
yes, and if you're not following Katy on Twitter, her Twitter is the Cater Tot. A lovely Twitter account to follow. Lots of positivity out there. But so on the show we talk, of course, about people's origin stories to tech and how they get here and what led you to this career. And it sounds like you have a very musical path to tech. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say that I really fought my way through a dark forest, and career-wise, and maybe in some other ways too. Like when I was a kid, I definitely have a really musical family, and it was one of the few things we all could kind of agree on was just that like we liked music, and that was one thing. So in school, I had the chance to start, just like a regular band class. And once I was in, I played the trumpet, and I was just like, you know what I like about this? I like, one, it's very loud, big fan. And I always had listened to a lot of like older music that featured a lot more brass, like Louis Armstrong, stuff like that was just like stuff that I listened to around the house. So I was always exciting about it. And yeah, I kind of stayed that course for most of school. I loved playing, but I also knew that like it was my best chance at like a scholarship to go to college. I loved it, but I was very much like big fish, small pond. Like my high school is really rural. I think there were maybe 30 kids in band, but like, you know how it is, like 25 of them were flutes, and you're like, this can't be accurate. That's too many flutes.
Too much
We
trouble.
had to test into an instrument at my elementary school, which I have a lot of thoughts on and would love to get. So we have two
That's
other
wild.
band geeks here on the show. Brandon, you are a percussionist, is that right?
Yep.
And then we have a trumpet player here. I did not get to choose my instrument because, and you have to imagine, this is the 90s when cassettes are our chosen form of audio, not high definition. And we had an instructor, lovely woman, but she played all these sound effects, and we had to mark on a sheet, like on a like a test sheet, what sounds we preferred. But looking back, I can't imagine a flute on a low-res cassette. I would have been like, no, too shrill, right? Like very old equipment.
You're like, well, I've listened to You Can Call Me Al, and I have strong opinions.
Great song.
Yeah,
yes,
great.
Absolutely. And
that's so strange.
I tested into. So here's a little insight into my fourth grade mind. Alto sax, and I was only given these options. Like, I'm sure someone's parents complained and tried to get their daughter into flute, but mine didn't.
Yeah.
My options were, what is the big one? Sousaphone, the big one that you have to wear around you.
Yeah. It's like a tuba or sousaphone.
A tuba and a alto sax. And, I wanted to be with all my friends and play like a different instrument, but no way was I going to play. I was like, I cannot, no, people would make fun of me if I played the tuba. So I went with alto sax. I had to test into it. Did you get to pick your instrument, Katie?
Yeah, fully. No one asked
What in the machine learning did I have to do to get my instrument?
I think you were part of an experiment. I think there's data out there that we could be using.
Did you choose, Brandon?
I'm a little unique. So I moved to Florida the summer before 6th grade. So the summer before middle school here in the US. And the new school I was joining, or actually I should rephrase that, in the school district I was joining, they didn't teach instruments until middle school. Whereas when I lived in New York, we started band in 2nd or 3rd grade. So I had already been playing percussion for a couple of years. And so, in middle school, they also had you test into an instrument. So you went around, you played you got to try all of them.
There was no hands-on. It was all
no hands-on.
This is not accessible either. Because imagine if you're hard of hearing. Like, come on, this is not accessible.
Testing. So actually, I thought it was pretty cool. Yeah, like you got to go around and like try out the tuba and see if you could get it to make a sound. Because honestly, that's the hardest part about an instrument is like, do you know how to buzz your lips to make a brass instrument create a sound? Do you know how to use a reed for a woodwind? I mean, percussion's pretty easy. You just hit stuff with a stick, and usually that's enough to make a sound. But yeah, I was fortunate to where I already had experience in percussion, so I still tested in, but I was kind of a shoo-in.
You tested in, but you were like real cocky about it. Like,
I will say the big difference was I did a little bit of, so percussion is anything from drums to what we call keyboard instruments. So xylophones, marimbas, vibraphones, chimes, anything like that. Anything you hit with a stick or a mallet. And so the biggest difference in the middle school was they had like xylophones and marimbas, and I had never played those before. So the band director put some sight music on the music stand and was like, okay, play this on the xylophone. I was like, what? Like, how do you do that? Like, can I just play the snare drum? But
yeah,
now I can do all of it.
Yeah, I definitely feel like there was none. Again, I went to school in the woods. Nobody paid attention. I feel very lucky that there was a band at all. There was a very small rural area in Oregon, and yeah, so there were only ever, I think, maybe 3-4 trumpets in the band, and I happened to be the best out of that group. So I also felt very accomplished but the sample size was not, wasn't really enough to go off of. But I did get a scholarship, and it was I don't know. I think, looking back, you're like, that was a really special thing. I'm really glad that happened for me. But at the time, I was just like, this is what is supposed to happen. Like, this is the path I'm supposed to be on. Like, of course I got a scholarship. I worked very hard, even though it's probably as random as anything else, And like, I was, I didn't love living at home. It wasn't a super happy place, but I loved music. And so the idea to like leave on that and have it be my way out felt very poetic, which I was also very into. I was into a lot of drama, a lot of Evanescence, like, just like a real, just a vibe, just like a sad girl vibe, that I was just like very, very about.
And with a music scholarship, what field does one go into with a music scholarship? Because I know as an actress, people would ask me that all the time. You're like, I'm going to be an actress, or, I would teach acting. What does that look like for a music scholarship?
Yeah. So, I mean, most people either know that they're going to be in the symphony, and that takes a long time. You just kind of have to wait for like a lot of older people to die who are currently first chair.
Is a symphony? Does every state have a symphony? Actual question that I do not know the answer to. And what defines a symphony? Like, because I feel like in the Bay Area we have, it's a lovely, it's like a group symphony in the East Bay that meets up as kind of like a crowd symphony. So what is a symphony, Katie?
These are all great questions. I want to say that most states have a symphony. I don't know if they have one. Like, I don't know if there's one at a state level, or if there's like, because like Chicago, New York obviously have them.
Boston.
Yeah. Like, there's a lot of great ones. There's a lot of like smaller ones too.
London Symphony Orchestra. I feel like I see that a lot.
I've heard of it.
Yeah, we have a San Francisco City Orchestra as well. So
yeah,
maybe it's more of a city thing.
But I mean, those things, like, they don't really pay. A lot of people, like a lot of musicians I know now, they like will gig as, for theaters, right? They'll be like in the orchestra pit, but that's just like a
Broadway's a pretty steady music job, I would think, kind of in the same way that I feel like an actor's steady job would be a TV show or a Broadway show or a touring show. Sounds like symphonies are kind of a sweet gig sometimes.
Yeah. And I was one of those, I think, again, because I had this very determined plan for like getting out of Dodge. So I was like, here's what you do. You get your scholarship and you go through college, and then you join a symphony, any symphony, whoever will take you. You do that until your first chair. Then you move up to a bigger symphony in your first year, and then eventually you're the conductor. That was sort of not everyone wants to be a conductor, but I thought it would be really cool.
Is it very Game of Thrones in the symphony world? I'm genuinely curious. Like, if you're like, I don't know how many trumpets there are, like 6 trumpets. Do you like have to fight your way to first trumpet?
Yep, you do. There's usually some kind of like, in the same way that you might have tested into an instrument, there were like tests within the sections, right? So, you all play the same short piece, and then the conductor, whoever judges you, and then puts you in order.
Wow. And I didn't know that. I didn't know how they determined the numbers.
Yeah, they basically like you all play the same thing. Sometimes it's like, it's not just talent. Sometimes it's range. Like, right? Like, oh, well, Katie can hit this like higher range, so she needs to be in the parts that are going to have the higher range, like in the same way that you might do with voice lessons. But like, for me, I think I was very lucky that I have sort of like a good sense of musicality. Again, I think just from being exposed to it a lot at home. And also, everyone else was bad. So I was like,
so it's lots of tests, it sounds like. Like, it sounds like a lot of whiteboarding for music almost to be like a professional musician, right?
Yeah. Like, there's a lot of, you are on the spot in front of, and it's not like they're like, okay, trumpets go into this room and we'll figure it out. It's like, here you are with the entire symphony or the band or whatever, play your piece.
Wow.
right? So it's very much based on that the
It's like
ability to like,
stand up. It's symphony stand up.
yeah. And I hated it. I mean, I hated the like, because here are some things you can't do super well with a dry mouth. Play a brass instrument. So, you know, like there are some instruments that I feel like if they're percussion or any of like the strings, that if you're like a little nervous, you can sort of work around. But if you get a dry mouth, you're like a little shaky, which I always was, then it starts being like, oh, what a cool vibrato you have. I'm like, thank you. I'm really nervous.
Yeah, singing as well. I feel like there's certain instruments that your body language or even just your mood can affect how you play.
Very much, very much. And when I got into college, still number one, baby. But again, still kind of a small college.
We've got a scholar among us.
Yeah, no big deal, but I've read some books. I definitely like, it was wildly difficult. And I went specifically to a school that was like really rigorous academically, because that's what I wanted. I just wanted to like, I always loved school. Again, like if you're not super excited about being in your home, then like school is a good backup. And so I loved being at school. I would get there, not voluntarily, but just because of like my family's transportation and stuff. I would always be there super early, reading every book. I would just be like, I remember going to the librarian and being like, what is the longest book in this library? Wow. And she said, I think at the time it was the Once and Future King.
Okay.
And which is like an Arthurian novel. It's just like the story of King Arthur, and it's not good or interesting. But I read it so hard.
So you could say that you read the longest book.
So I could say, and that was very much how I was. I think I wanted to do the hardest things so that I would feel, you know, like worthwhile and valid and like, okay, well, I'm maybe not like the strongest person in my family, but I've read the most books. I'm smarter than them, which is like not a good way to measure any of that. But you know,
I identify with that. I watched every musical at Blockbuster, and that was like a thing that I had to do. I couldn't explain it, but I was like, I need to watch every single one of these, so I am the expert at these musicals. Okay.
Yeah, like I needed to be in like the expert in my domain because there were so many parts of my life that I felt I had so little control over. So it was like, I'm on this path and I play the trumpet and then I go here and I do this. But it was it was my first year in college. So when you're a music major, they're not messing around with the amount of credits you have to take because you have to study your own instrument. So you have like a one-on-one like coaching basically with a teacher. You have to be in the symphony and probably also the jazz band, like, because there's always both, right? And so you're in both of those, which are separate courses with separate rehearsal times and performances and all the things. Every music major, no matter what your instrument, you have to take piano, which I had never played. I have these tiny baby hands, can't reach the keys. And the professor was just like the angriest, smallest, most furious little man on the planet. He had really specific rules, and he was just like, you know, as an 18-year-old who'd never been anywhere but home, he was absolutely terrifying. One time I remember at the piano recital, I was like, you know, you have to memorize everything. So I was like playing my little beginner piece, and a lot of the other students were like more advanced in piano because it was something that like a lot of music majors do learn. And I remember playing this piece, and I remember he just looked at me and he said, "That was wonderful, but it was an original composition." And I was like, oh, I guess I didn't play the piece right, is what he was trying to tell me. Like,
this sounds like a line from Glee.
He was harsh. He was so just like, yeah, I remember that because it was very funny, but also I wanted to be dead. So it was like complicated.
Yeah. Have you guys I feel like I've had one or two teachers in my life like that just scared me into learning the content. Never a good method to learn.
Yeah.
Oh, Brandon, you're lucky.
Yeah.
I think it's these creative types.
I agree.
I do think it happens a lot in the arts.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, and this is something I came across a lot with like being in music and a little bit, and I was a little involved with the theater world, was that sometimes people in those areas are given license to be not very nice under the guise of creativity and artistry.
Creative license, for
Yeah.
sure.
Right.
They're like, oh, well, that's just how they are, but look at this magnificent thing that they made. I'm like,
It's a creative
well,
genius.
exactly, right? It's like, I don't know, there's kind of this idea that like in order to be creative, in order to be this creative genius, you kind of have to be unwell in some way, right? You have to like have a condition, or you just have to be like a miserable person. Like there's all of these ideas about like what does it mean to be a creative genius? I think in very similar in tech, right? Like the people who we think of as being like, oh, well, this person, they're like the greatest programmer. And then we like make allowances for things that are maybe not very nice, you know, in the way that they treat people, right? And you can see it in all the stories of all of the like original founders, Jobs and Gates. And you're like, yeah, they just like weren't nice to people. And people were like, that's okay. I believe in the dream. And I'm like, I have a dream of not getting a chair thrown at me. So like, that's the dream I abide by.
I think creative license is so subjective to like what constitutes like a good piece of art. My mom was a artist and also taught art, and especially when you're dealing with children, but especially with adults, giving feedback is important, but art is so subjective, right? Like, and I think that was the most difficult thing for myself as a non-technical person with code. You forget a semicolon and the code does not work and it will not run, and you are doing a bad job if you can't get your code to run. But with art, it was so, you know, if you're an actress, there's so many different ways someone can portray a role, or if you're an artist, there's so many different ways that people can paint something. So that's been a very interesting black or white transition from my left brain life into tech, I think. And I'm sure with music, that's probably pretty similar, right?
Well, you know what? It's like you've led me to fascinating territory, Chloe. It's like you're good at this.
Maybe that. Are you more of a jazz fan, Katie?
I do like some surprises. I'm not gonna lie. That's why I like JavaScript, right? It's just like, I don't know. Maybe there won't be a semicolon. Ooh. But
who knows?
Who knows?
Am I fancy today?
Who knows?
Maybe I'll add it in.
You know what's more important are the semicolons you don't type. Oh,
wow.
Yeah. That's a jazz joke for fans out there. But yeah, so like I very much I realized about a year into this like really intensive music degree that I had a problem, which was my jaw. There's something not quite right. And I didn't know what it was. And now I do, but it's not super helpful. It's just in a very exaggerated form of TMJ, which is kind of like lockjaw basically. But my jaw just started to hurt. And I mean, you're playing for hours and hours a day. And I realized that like the plan, the sort of path that I was on, I could see it just like evaporating. Do you know what I mean? Like I was just like, my face hurts. And I went to the nurse. Again, this is like another person who scared me a lot and probably maybe wasn't an expert. She was just the campus nurse. And she said, oh yeah, if you don't get your jaw reset, but with a surgery, it's gonna be stuck forever. And I was like, well, I guess I'll just go.
Yeah. It's like in the musical A Chorus Line, there's a whole song about, you know, what I did for love, which is essentially if you're a dancer, your job is to dance. And if you get an injury, if you break your leg, if you know, or if you kind of age out of being the age range of a ballerino, your job's over. So like having that passion for something and not being able to do it is so difficult.
Yeah. So I feel like I just went through a period of like, I mean, I was definitely depressed and I was a little like at sea, and I switched schools to somewhere less intense. And I got into literature, which had always been something I was interested in. You know, I was already reading the biggest books there were, so didn't sound too hard. And I did. I mean, like, look, if somebody could just pay me to read all the time, if that were the job, that would be great. I loved my time studying literature and being in it, but like, yeah, like would I pay that much for it again? Like, no, probably not. But,
right. It's that like, what do you do with the BA in English from Avenue Q is a song. Like, I think when we're, for creative folks like us, I think oftentimes people don't come up to us and say, great, like, what are you going to do with your theater degree? Do you know how much you will make as an actress? Do you know how much, do you know what it's like to be a trumpet player in a professional symphony and what that life looks like? And I think it's very cool to see people from these non-traditional backgrounds come into there, because a lot of us have like never heard of computers. Like, what was your computer relationship?
Zero. It was none. I didn't have a computer at home. It was either something we were like, I don't really know if it was something the family, like, I mean, we couldn't afford it, / there was very little interest. The only things I knew about computers came from my grandpa, who was he was ahead of his time. That man loved Radio Shack more than all of us, and I was fine with it.
Yes.
He was always bringing us like fun little electronic things, and he got us our first sort of computer, which was called a web TV.
Ooh, what is that?
Yeah. Oh, it's horrible. It's like if you had a computer, but it didn't work.
Okay.
As far as I understand it, and I'm going to be like a little bit wrong about this, but basically it was just something you hooked up to your TV as an internet proxy. So your TV became the monitor, and you just had web TV. Yeah, it had an infrared
keyboard. Yeah.
Yeah. And the funniest thing to me was that I remember ours was hooked up to this TV that like was so old it didn't have a remote. It had knobs.
Wow.
And something that like juxtaposition of being like, I'm on the internet on this TV from like 1972 was like wild.
Clicking over to channel 3.
Yeah, it's exactly the channel. And I remember not understanding it. Like I remember like not knowing what to do with the internet. And at that time it was like relatively limited, right? It wasn't like, or at least it was on the web TV. It was a little bit like, there wasn't like a Google search engine. It was just web TV search. So there was like a web TV search. I think again, it was like relatively limited in this like strange proprietary way. And it had a guidebook that it came with so that you could, look up keywords in the guidebook and then look them up on the web TV.
No Clippy to help out here. No assistance.
No. But I used computers in school a little bit. I took like business classes, so I learned how to type, and like I generally like knew what they were, but just like I was not fluent in any way.
And they just weren't around you, it sounds like.
No, they just weren't there. And when they were, like, I didn't have the context to understand what they were for. I remember my grandpa being like, yeah, you could like, I don't know, type in horses and then you'll see something about horses. And I was like, why would I type in horses? And he was like, it's an example. And I was like, I don't care about horses even a little. Is there something else?
Okay, I love this because when I think, so I imagine Katie and I were pretty similar ages. What the internet to me as a child, like I'm going to say 4, 5, 6, early computers, my grandpa had a computer and the only websites that I knew about were websites that started popping up on TV. So like DisneyChannelTV.com or like ZoogDisney.com. So the only websites I was visiting was like 101 Dalmatians live action movie.com. And I didn't understand what significance a computer would have to me or the internet specifically, because I was like, this is just information about the movie. Like, what? I don't need this. I haven't even seen this movie. And it would have Glenn Close on it and some sparkly Dalmatians. But I think that's such an like, Brandon, you probably had a very different relationship with the internet, right? When you were younger.
I mean, we were kind of the opposite of Katie's family. Like, we had a computer really early on, like before is either at Windows 3.1 or before Windows 3.1. I mean, I remember I learned MS-DOS back in the day as just, that's how you use the computer. And really, if I'm being honest, it was my dad showing me how to play video games on the computer. So it's like put in the floppy drive and then run this command to kick off the exe file in MS-DOS. But yeah, I mean, the internet was unique back in the day. Before we had great search engines, I mean, they slowly started coming out. Like there was it like Alta Vista? I mean, Yahoo search used to be.
Oh, I was solidly on AOL. My first 5 years on the internet. AOL girl through and
also
through.
Did AOL.
I feel like I was on the equivalent of like the store brand. Do you know what I mean? It's like Oh, I was on web TV. Maybe you've heard of it. No, no one has heard of it. It was like not a thing.
But yeah, I mean, like you said, Chloe, back in the day, before search was really a thing, and before like really, really good fast search was a thing, yeah, you just had to know the URL, and so you would just go to the websites you knew, and like kind of like how today we'll share like memes and stuff with friends. Like back then, we would forward emails with like links to URLs, and like you just bookmark them, and you have this bookmark folder that was just gigantic because those are the only websites you knew about in the world.
Yeah.
But it was a strange place back in the day.
I got a bunch of emails from my grandpa. He was the only person who ever emailed me. And they were all, jokes, like chain things. They were just like very silly jokes and that weren't funny, but I read all of them. I even still have a very old Yahoo email, and like there are easy ways to shut it down. I just kept it because that's like he's not around anymore, and it was just like I was like I'm gonna keep my grandpa's emails. I'm gonna keep him in this special Yahoo account that he used to email me at, and like it's like a little time capsule. But
I'm so jealous of y'all because it's kind of funny that I work at Microsoft now because my family was a family of artists and my mother was learning graphic design. So naturally she wanted one of those big, I mean, it was beautiful, those candy apple, clear Mac, giant like craters.
Yeah.
But I was so upset because all I wanted to do was play games on the computer, and there were no games for Macs back in the day. They were only PC games, and I had a neighbor friend who had Putt Putt Goes to the Parade, and all I wanted to do was play this game. I'd never played a computer game before this. It was like mind-blowing to me. And so slowly but surely my parents would take me to Fry's and I could find Mac specific games, but they were so rare. And Brandon, I'm so jealous of this game life. And we have people in the chat here talking about Mickey Mouse games like that were on 720K floppies. Wow. Yeah. Games are a gateway to tech that I think I missed out on a little bit.
Yeah, same. We had like some consoles. We had a Super Nintendo, and we had like the original Game Boy. I think my mom still has it. Like it still works because those things are bricks.
Oh,
but
yes.
like I definitely and I think something that came up later was that I did not understand computers outside the context of the internet either. Right. So like I became internet literate. Like in college, my partner was a programmer. And so they helped me like understand a little bit. They fixed my computer a lot. I got my first laptop as like a college gift. And then but like I didn't do anything else but get on Yahoo chat or whatever. Like spent a lot of time in some Star Wars chat rooms.
Ooh.
No biggie, pretty cool.
Probably some great conversations happening in there.
Oh man, it's like so easy to lie about your age on the internet. And I don't recommend it to everyone out here who's maybe just don't do it. It's not great. But I did. And I think I didn't understand like the internet as a separate concept from computers, right? Like I had no concept of like hardware or what that meant.
Yeah.
And I don't know why it just didn't occur to me because this was the only context I'd ever really worked with them in. Even things that like, I learned a bunch of software in school, like, you learn like the Microsoft suite in school. But in my mind, although maybe I knew it wasn't on the internet, I don't think I had a concept of like, what is computer?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And but you said you got your first computer at how old?
18.
18. Wow.
Yeah. I got a laptop as a college gift. I had to buy a wireless card for it. It was a big deal, And
on the Wi-Fi.
Yeah. I was like, internet in your bedroom?
Let me check my router real quick.
Yeah. And I didn't, for many years, after I switched degrees, I worked the entire time I was in school, and through pure nepotism, I'm not ashamed to admit, my partner worked in IT at the college and got me a job there. And they were like, cool, what do you know about computers? I was like, I can type so much. Click, click, click. But basically, I just learned about computers through that job and spent the next 4 years as I finished my degrees working in IT and working in support. And, you know, I mean, like, when it comes to that kind of like university setting, the computers were just like not that complicated because there's a limited amount of things they let people do on the computers in that setting. So it's like, I mean, you can get a virus, but I can just like wipe it and it's fine. So that's how I started learning about like hardware separate and what you could do on the internet. And when I graduated, I lost my job because it was a student specific job. And I was like, I mean, I guess I could work at like Best Buy. And that made me not thrilled to think about because I had worked in a lot of retail already. And like I was telling you before the break, I was real tired of getting yelled at by customers. One time I just wouldn't sell this woman the like, you know, they have like beds in the department store and they have like bedding on them. And she wanted to buy the things that were on display. And I was like, I literally don't have the knowledge to be able to do that for you. Like I couldn't if I wanted to. Like I have nothing. You can't
do
have
not
it.
sell this.
Right.
And yeah, she chased me to customer service, throwing little decorative pillows at me the whole way. And I was just like, man, do I love $7.25 an hour this much?
Tales from Retail could be a whole other show, I think.
I think so.
That's our show, Katie.
Yeah. And so I knew I didn't want to get back into that, but I was definitely like losing music set me on feeling adrift for honestly like way longer than I'm proud of. I think I just didn't realize it. I didn't realize like it was it was like an outlet, right? It was like all artistic things was like this expression, but it had also served as a kind of like therapy and medication for me also. And so losing it, I think, kept me from feeling this like purpose. And so I was just kind of like drifting. And after I graduated, I lucked into a job as a freelance editor. I was looking for editor jobs and I got lucky as a freelancer, but I was just moving commas around all day, which is not the worst thing in the world.
And you were reading probably
and
a lot.
I was reading hard. Okay. Like nobody's business. And I felt very lucky in that because I was freelancing, I did a lot of different projects. So get to read about 1,000 different subjects, like somewhere between, you know, a PhD thesis on whether tropical earthworms can rehabilitate soil to full romance novels that were hard to correct because they were so specific. And I did that for 6 or 7 years. I did it for a pretty long time and I really enjoyed it, but it didn't feel like enough. And when you're freelancing, you know, it's a hustle. Like I was always worried and I was relying on my my at the time spouse's income, right? Like they were a programmer and so we had this like household income, so I didn't have to worry about it as much, but I wanted more. I just didn't know how to get it. And they always had wanted me to learn to code, but I came across a lot of the problems that you talked about earlier, which is just that like, one, I had no concept of it before I met them. And also it felt like this very formulaic thing. I was just like, yeah, I get it. Like you memorize the things and then you type those things where they belong. Like, or that was my sort of, you know, preconceived notion of it. And I think that was just like specific to my partner almost. Like they had a certain experience where like they had started with BASIC when they were a kid and moved up with it. And the way that they programmed was very mathematical because they as a person were very mathematical. But I wasn't, so I just like didn't see it happening. And it wasn't until I started meeting like more coworkers and people in the community that I started seeing that like the ways that code could be more creative and be more expressive. And I thought, like, oh, well, that's something I do know how to do. Like, that's something I am interested in. Like, if the point of learning this is to then create another thing that I love, like that totally makes sense. Like if
like
I learn
digital crafting, sort of.
Exactly, right? Yeah. Like if the outcome is another piece of art, then yeah, it's totally worth learning. And it doesn't have to be just for I don't know. Like, I don't know what I thought it was for before. I was just like, yeah, math.
Right.
Which, as most of us know, is just not true. And also, like, math is also learnable, it turns out. Like, I didn't spend a lot of time on it, so I thought I was bad at math. But it turns out most people are not bad at math. They just don't practice math.
Very that. Yes.
Right? So it's like, yeah, you didn't spend time practicing it, therefore you're not great at it. Like, just like anything else. And I think
it's so full circle that I saw you give this talk where you had drawn your own illustrations in the talk, because I thought, oh, cool, someone adding something creative to their talk.
Yeah, like, it was always really important to me that, like, when I finally decided, like, okay, now's the time to code, I knew that I was going to go to a boot camp, because if I could have learned it on my own, I would have learned it in the many years of the relationship that I was in with this expert. You know what I mean? I just am not great at learning such a new concept on my own. So I knew I needed to be in class. That's a question people ask me a lot. It's like, how did you know you needed to go to a boot camp? And like, for me, it was just like, I need to be in a classroom with somebody telling me there's a chance I might not be good.
External accountability. Shout out to frequent co-host and guest of the pod, PJ, for being self-taught, because I don't have the discipline. I needed other people around me.
Yeah. Things I've taught myself, literally nothing. I will eat until I get a stomach ache unless someone is like, excuse me, does your stomach hurt? And I'll be like, yeah, it does. I don't understand. I knew I needed to be in a classroom, and I went to the touring school in Denver, which was great. And it was a little bit longer than some of the other ones. I can't remember a lot of my life.
Previous guest of the show, Danny, also went to touring school. We've got a lot of touring folks out in the community that are just killing it in senior roles and out in the world.
Look, I mean, I'll say that I have a lot of opinions about boot camps. And as anyone who goes to a boot camp does, right? But like, I think touring definitely like was one of the better schools, and continues to be, I think, as far as the curriculum goes. And I thrived in a school environment. Like I said, I just like being in school.
Yeah.
I just like it. People are like, here's what you need to learn. I'm like,
you just needed the right school, Katy.
I just needed the right school.
Yeah. I think that's a lot of what we see with people who are on this show and people that I know in the community who come to tech non-traditionally is oftentimes we're just not around technology. It's not for lack of interest. Like, we were all in a group chat earlier talking about Chuck E. Cheese. I loved Chuck E. Cheese and I loved Disneyland. And I know for a fact it was because the animatronics fascinated me. But I didn't have anybody in my life to tell me that's technology. Like, that's something you could learn how to build and work with. So I think it's, sometimes it's just a matter of being introduced or even just marinating in the subject matter a little bit with a partner or with a friend that, like, we've seen with folks like PJ and Lorena. But sometimes it just takes the right teacher even, I think, probably.
Well, and it's so fascinating because, like, during my time in boot camp, because I had made, it was like a big life change. And I tell this now when I talk to people who are in boot camps, is like, okay, nobody's really at this boot camp because everything was going great. Like, that's not when you decide to change your whole life, usually. Yeah. Like,
you don't just wake up and pay a bunch of money and decide to make a career change. There's a lot of, you reach a point.
Right. It's usually some kind of breaking point, and it's a big risk. It costs money and time, and you don't know if you're going to be good at it. And I was filled with fear the entire time. Again, I have an anxiety disorder, so I am filled with fear most of the time, but like extra. And during that boot camp time was the time when I had a full, like, I started, it had been many years since I'd had like a panic attack, something like that. And those started coming back because that environment is so intense.
Did you know what imposter syndrome was before your boot camp? Because I did not.
No, I heard people talking about it. And I was just like, I don't know if I'm supposed to be here because I'm too worried about everything. You know what I mean? Like, I couldn't separate the things that were going on. So I think for me, it was like, I started having, full, like, I don't want to say regressions, but it was just another, when you have any kind of disorder, it's just like, it's just where you're at in it, right? Your best is different every day. And my best was just a little bit less than it had been before that pressure. But like, I started going back to therapy. And then for my like sort of like capstone project, I learned JavaScript just so that I could build a game, like we talked about, because I was like, how do I get people to understand like what I'm feeling? And having ideas for projects when you're just free like that is hard. So I built a very bad, not bad in idea wise, you know, objectively it didn't work like it was supposed to, but I built a game that was I think it was called Shine. And it was about going around and interacting with positive things in the game. And every time you interacted with something positive, your little character got a little bit shinier and started to like glow. And then if you like stayed by yourself for too long and didn't do the positive things, that your glow would start to go down a little
Katy,
bit.
this is so wholesome.
You know.
Okay, wait. This is a great segue to following Katy on Twitter, because her Twitter is a beam of positivity, almost as much as Shania bought in my life when I see it every time in my feed.
Let's go, girls.
But just, you know, hey, you can do it. You can do the thing. So everybody out there, make sure that you're following Katy on Twitter. Just for it is no surprise to me that you built a positivity app, because that is just so your aesthetic. Oh my goodness. We have had, okay, I feel like we have to have you back on another episode.
I'm so sorry.
Katy.
We didn't get
our best episodes are the two-parters, because there's just so much journey here. And I think this is an episode that I'm going to send to folks who asked me about boot camps, part 1 and part 2, that we're going to have you back on here for.
Yeah.
But Katy, where can people find you on the interwebs, and where should they go check out your stuff? And I think we're going to just like make Katy commit on the show. She's going to come back, right, Katy?
Yeah, I'll come back.
Okay, good. We got it recorded.
Twitter's your best bit. I mean, I love Twitter. It's a horrible place that I like to send little positivity jolts into just to see what happens. It's chaos, and I think anytime there's chaos, there's a chance for something really good to happen. So find me, the Cater Tot, on Twitter. That's your best bet. And you know, I work at Circle CI, so if you're like, man, I need to work there, I love it so much, you can message me about that.
Wonderful. Katy, you're such a bright spot of positivity in the community. We can't wait to have you back. And I can't wait to just talk more about boot camps and the job search. We didn't even get to the job search. So
right.
Let's talk about, just this as a reminder for myself, let's talk about the worst interview we've all had.
Ooh, that's a good cliffhanger.
Yeah.
I'm sure as someone who had to audition so much as a musician that we're going to have some very interesting whiteboarding stories. Oh, yeah. All right, y'all. On that very intense, I'm excited for this episode. On this cliffhanger, that has been it for 8-Bits. Brandon, do you want to close us out?
Yes, thanks everybody. Thanks everybody for joining us. Make sure to check out all the episodes on 8bits.tv. Subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcasting platform, and we'll see you back here next week at Wednesday, 1 p.m. Pacific.